Good morning and welcome to our Sunday school class. We are in lesson 72. You know, we live in a world that's reluctant to part with pleasures. Everybody around us is seeking pleasures. People are pursuing their own desires in the things of this life. Those desires are otherwise known as lusts. And the man we're going to look at today is no exception. He was one who was a Hercules in Israel with superhuman strength. Of course, you know his name. His name is Samson. He's the one who was called to deliver Israel, but in the end, he needed deliverance himself. Samson. So, what is lust? Let's define that first. Lust is a craving, a longing, a desire for something strong, a strong desire for something, especially that which is forbidden. Lust is not just a sexual desire, but it can be a desire for anything that is self-motivated. It could be a lust for good looks. It could be a lust for clothes. It could be a lust for money, for fame, for power, for friends, for worldliness. It could be even something simple as a desire for food. That's something we all understand. Chocolate chip cookies that are forbidden. We have an unquenchable desire to have those forbidden cookies. And when we do, it becomes a lust. So let's look at Samson today, the strongest man on earth, and yet the weakest when it came to his own lust. He was a man of promise, a man of power, a man of pleasure, but a man of presumption, and finally a man of pain. If we're going to have victory over lust in our life, we must learn from the bad example of Samson. So let's first of all look at him being a man of promise. Often, when God wants to do a great work of deliverance, He sends that which we recognize as the most fragile, defenseless thing. He sends a baby. When God wanted to deliver Israel from Egypt, He sent Moses to Amram and Jochebed. When Israel needed revival, God sent Samuel and Elkanah to Hannah. Samuel to Elkanah and Hannah. When the fullness of time came, God sent Jesus to be born as a baby through Mary. Now Israel needs a deliverer, and God sent to Manoah and his wife a son, Samson. In Judges chapter 13, verse number 7, it says, "But he said unto me, Behold, thou shalt conceive and bear a son. And now drink no wine, nor strong drink, neither eat anything clean, unclean thing, for the child shall be a Nazirite to God from the womb to the day of his death." The word Nazirite is a very specific meaning. The Bible's description of this Nazirite vow we can find for ourselves in Numbers chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When either a man or a woman shall separate themselves, to vow a vow of the Nazirite, to separate themselves unto the Lord, he shall separate himself from wine and from strong drink, and shall drink no vinegar of wine, nor vinegar of strong drink, neither shall he drink any liquor of grapes, nor eat moist grapes or dried. All the days of his separation shall he eat nothing that is made of vine tree, from the kernels even to the husks. All the days of his vow of his separation, there shall no razor come upon his head until the days be fulfilled, which he separateth himself unto the Lord. He shall be holy, and he shall let the locks of his hair of his head grow. All the days of his separation of himself unto the Lord, he shall come at no dead body. He shall not make himself unclean, his father or for his mother, for his brother or for his sister, when they die, because the consecration of God is upon his head. All the days of his separation, he is holy unto the Lord." So do you Recognize the key word there the whole time? This word separation. Separation. So, do we need to separate in our life from all that is enjoyable? Do we need to abstain from everything in order to have power over lust? Everything enjoyable? Absolutely not. Desire, the desires God gives us, is a wonderful thing. Desires can be from the Lord. It's an inordinate desire, the wrong desire, that it becomes lust. Psalm 37, verse 4, "Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart." Desire comes from God, and God provides for the appetite fulfillment of those desires, the appropriate fulfillment of those desires. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4. "Marriage is honorable in all, the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge." Repeatedly in Scripture, we see that God takes pleasure in the pleasure of His children. But that pleasure must be held in the bounds of that which is appropriate, that which is God-honoring. A campfire is a wonderful thing. But if that campfire exceeds its boundary of where it's supposed to be, it can be a very dangerous and deadly thing. It overruns the campsite, and it's very destructive. Water in a river can be a wonderful thing. It's life-giving. But water raging over its banks, without banks to hold it back, is dangerous. Samson's life was to be a life of great promise. This would be fully realized only as it was a life of obedience and submission and separation from that which would destroy him. So he was a man of promise, but he's also a man of power. Great power. I love some of the stories of Samson's strength. Judges 13, verse 24 through 25. And the woman bare a son, and his name was Samson, and the child grew, and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to move at him at times in the camp of Dan between Zorah and Eshcol. It's interesting to me that it's said of Samson, and of what the other judges say this as well, that the Spirit of the Lord came upon them. But it's only Samson, not the other judges, that we find this phrase that the Lord blessed him. It's right there at the start of his life that God gives His blessing to Samson. And so right away he's a man of God's power and a man of God's blessing. We don't know all of Samson's great feats, but we could consider some of them, and they were incredible. The physical acts that God used, and as He moved upon Samson to accomplish these things, he killed a lion with his bare hands. He slew 30 Philistines with no weapon. He caught 300 foxes and tied their tails together and lit them on fire. How do you catch a fox anyway? Wow. He repeatedly broke the attempts to bind him. Anyone that tried to tie him up or do anything to bind him, just busted it open. He slew 1,000 men with the jawbone of the donkey. He broke away and carried the gates of the city of Gaza up the mountain. He destroyed, in the end, the huge amphitheater of the Philistines. There's no question that this man was a man who had seen firsthand the power of God upon his life. Samuel this quote is from Samuel Rideout. And he said this, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, in his commentary on Judges. He said this: "God never allows the enemy to gain power over us unless it's a result of our own failure. He never allows us to be brought under the power of evil unless there has been a departing from Himself. The weakest and the most ignorant of believers will be kept from the wiles and the power of the enemy so long as the heart is true and loyal to Christ. What a comfort it is that the weakest and most untutored saint, the youngest child of God, is perfectly safe from all this, so long as there is simplicity of communion with the Father and with His Son, Jesus Christ. You may think that you are a weak Christian, but if you keep your heart right with God, you have His strength to depend on. That's the example of Samson. So he's a man of promise. He's a man of power. Now let's look at the fact that he's a man of pleasure. He lived for pleasures. Judges 14, 1 and 2. And Samson went down to Timnath, and saw a woman of Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. And he came up and told his father and his mother and said, I have seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me to wife. He saw a woman. The words, I have seen, mean to gaze upon. He studied her with intent. Samson is now being directed by his lust, the lust of his eyes. He's watched her. He wanted her. He saw what was forbidden, but changed his convictions to accomplish his passions. As Samson continually looked upon her, he eventually got what he thought he wanted. You see it there in Judges 16, verse 1. Then Samson went to Gaza and saw there an harlot and went in unto her. It tells us in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 32, that Samson was a man of faith. And yet we see him doing this. He certainly wasn't faithful, but he was a man of faith. You see, there are two different things. He wasn't faithful to the teachings of his parents. Didn't listen to his parents. He wasn't faithful to his Nazirite vow. He eventually broke that. He wasn't faithful to the people of Israel and to the laws of his God. He was a faithful man to himself and to his own pleasures and to his own lusts. He did that which pleased him. He was a man of faith, but he was not a faithful man. He lived for pleasure. So he's a man of promise, a man of power, a man of pleasure. The next one, he's a man of presumption. Presumption. He presumed that he could sin and it wouldn't hurt a thing. Samson's fall began with many little presumptions. For example, Judges 14, verse 5. If you look at that. Judges 14, verse 5. And then went Samson down to his father and his mother to Timnath, and came to the, what? Vineyards of Timnath. And behold, a lion roared against him. What's he doing in the vineyards? He walked among the vineyards. A dangerous place for a man who wasn't supposed to be doing anything with grapes. God even sent Samson to, he basically warned him there by putting this lion in his path. God's warning him. What are you doing here, Samson? What are you doing? Doesn't this demonstrate how amazingly gracious and merciful God is? God gave him mercy even in that time to try wake him up by sending him the lion. And God gave him mercy by allowing him to rend the lion in two. Gave him strength to do it, even though he was in the wrong place. Judges 14, verses 5 and 6. The verse 6 goes on, the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him and rent him, the lion, as he would have rent a kid. And he had nothing in his hand, and he told not his father or his mother what he had done. Yeah, he didn't tell them what he had done because he didn't want them to know where he was. He was in the vineyard where he shouldn't have been. I wonder, are you keeping some secret lust or pleasure hidden from others? Are you walking down a forbidden path yourself? Presumption is expecting the blessing and protection of God while continuing to violate His commands. Presumption is like praying that God would keep me from walking into a wall while I continued to walk towards it. Samson assumed that he could continue to enjoy the blessings of God while continuing to violate the principles that provided that blessing. When is the point of no return? When you think you can handle it. Let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. Judges 16, verse 4. And it came to pass afterwards that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. So now we come to Delilah. Delilah lived in a Philistine city of Sorek. Sorek means, guess what? It means choice vines. Here we go. Samson's doing it again. He presumed that he could break all of his vows with the Lord, and the Lord would just continue to give him strength. One of Satan's most effective plans to make himself appear that the sin is just insignificant. Make himself so that we think so little of him and of the sin and the potential consequences that we continue to do that which is wrong. Satan wants to remove himself from our minds, but we need to be aware of his trying to destroy us. Samson's a man of promise. He's a man of pleasure, power, pleasure. He's a man of presumption. Let's look at the last one. He's a man of pain. Judges chapter 16, verses 20 through 21. The end of Samson's life is a very sad one. In verse 20 it says, And she said, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he woke out of his sleep and said, I will go out as other times before, and shake myself. And he wist not that the Lord was departed from him. But the Philistines took and put out his eyes, brought him down to Gaza, bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house. What a tragic end. Now the one who was called to release the captive was himself being held captive. Samson found that although every pleasure of lust of his flesh, if his fleshly desire was given to him, he never lived a life of satisfaction. That's exactly what it says in James chapter 4, verse 2. Ye lust, and ye have not. Ye kill, and ye desire to have, and cannot obtain. Ye fight, and ye war, and ye have not, because ye ask not. The pleasures of this life are so temporary, so quickly fading. Samson's life ends tragically. Could he have escaped the condemnation of lust? Absolutely he could have. Can you? Yes, you can. That's the wonderful news. That if you know what it means to be born from above, to be saved, to be part of the family of God through Jesus Christ, you can escape the power of lust. 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 4 says, Whereby are given unto us exceeding great and precious promises, and that by these we might be partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world through lusts. So how great is this promise of deliverance? Consider the one who brought the news of this deliverance to Manoah. Manoah didn't recognize this as the angel of the Lord to start with. This is Jesus Christ. Manoah asked the angel his name. It's in Judges 13, verse 18. Back up there. Judges 13, verse 18. And the angel of the Lord said unto him, Why askest thou thus after my name, seeing it is secret? The word secret here comes from the same root word that is used in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. For unto us a child is born, for unto us a son is given, and his name shall be called Wonderful. That word wonderful is the same word secret. I believe this is none other than Jesus Christ himself. I believe the one who delivered this message of promise was Jesus Christ. He continues to bring this message of promise, of deliverance today for all who believe. John 8:36, If the Son therefore shall make you free, ye shall be free indeed. That word indeed means it's going to be reality. It's going to be real. So you can be free from lusts in your daily life. You can be set free through the power of Christ. So then the key to victory is to daily realize that freedom that we have in Him. That freedom was completely granted in salvation. The Spirit of God that was born in me is the one who is always victorious. And as I submit myself to Him, I win over lust, over passion, over perceived pleasure. Only as I walk in the Spirit do I enjoy victory. It's never the product of my own flesh, or of my own resolve, or of my own strength. Galatians chapter 5, verse 16, This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. Take the time to go through that lesson material today and read through those passages in the book of Judges carefully, and let the Lord speak to your heart.